The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, America. Good morning, world. Good morning, CHD. Welcome once again. My name is Michael Kane. I am the Director of Advocacy here at Children's Health Defense. Today, we are talking about covidjustice.org. America deserves accountability. We have the coalition on here to discuss exactly what this petition is, and we need you to sign it. Go to covidjustice.org to sign this petition that is calling for a reckoning, that is calling for the great crimes of COVID to finally be recognized and dealt with by the federal Senate of the United States. That is the goal. We launched this yesterday for the first time, and we have over 15,000 signatures that have made their way to this website, that have clicked on it, that have signed it. 15.4 thousand. There's the live clicker that Lou just updated. And we have an amazing coalition that helped to launch this. Children's Health Defense, Health Freedom Defense Fund stands for Health Freedom, Autism Action Network, and the Brownstone Institute. And we have people on from all of these organizations representing them today so that we can get into a conversation about it. And let's get right into it. Let's bring them all on. We have Jeffrey Tucker from Brownstone, Leah Wilson from Stands for Health Freedom, Leslie Manukian from Health Freedom Defense Fund, and John Gilmore of Autism Action Network. This is fantastic. Oh, and I might add, a number of other groups are signing on. We're updating the website later today to show numerous groups that are signing on. We have a ton of support happening. Let's zoom in on Jeffrey for a minute. I want to start the talk here. Jeffrey, many months ago, me and Mary Holland started wrangling some people into a meeting, and you and others that are on this call agreed to come on the meeting. And I said, man, we kind of need a Senate strategy for medical freedom, for vaccine choice, for bodily autonomy. And in our very first meeting, it felt like a light bulb went off over your head. And you said, we need the Senate to have a resolution on COVID. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Why don't you talk a little bit about the actual resolution itself? Because this is effectively your brainchild.
That's a bit of an exaggeration. In fact, I would credit the actual brainchild of this is about a year ago, I was in an airport bar sitting there in the morning, like people do, and I'm sitting next to this guy, and he noticed I was wearing a rubber bracelet, and he said, "Hey, what does that say?" And I said, "Well, it says I won't be locked down." And he said, "Well, what does that even mean?" I said, "Well, you remember the COVID thing? I mean, we couldn't go to church. A lot of people couldn't leave our houses. I couldn't fly to see my mother. We couldn't visit people in the hospitals. The kids couldn't go to school. I don't know if I just think that I was just a mess, and this bracelet means that I'm never going to comply with that again." And it was funny. He paused and he looked at me in a puzzled way. He goes, "COVID?" He goes, "Yeah, we've never really had a reckoning for that, have we, as a nation?" I said, "No, not really." So that comment just stuck with me. We just kind of moved on past it. It was 6 years ago, pretty much today, that the World Health Organization was leaving its junket that they took to Wuhan that included the deputy secretary to Fauci, NIH officials, people from the UK and Europe. They went to Wuhan and said, "Oh, look how they dealt with infectious disease here." They locked everybody in their homes, and everybody complied, and the disease went away. That's what the whole world should do. So that was 6 years ago today. And then a few weeks later, we found ourselves in that exact same position, suddenly divided between essential and unessential, told we can't celebrate Easter, can't celebrate Christmas, the kids can't go to school. Small businesses were shut down. we're being told crazy things like douse your mail with hand sanitizer and so on. This, and you have to have new ventilators installed and plexiglass everywhere. And if the whole nation was in upheaval, people were fleeing their states, going to other places. They were fleeing the country to go live in Mexico for 6 months or a year, and so on. And it's led to such a learning loss, a demoralization, a confusion. The Bill of Rights just overnight went away. And there was never a vote on this by the Senate, by the Congress, but it was all an action of the administrative state. Just these bureaucrats changing words on websites, and suddenly the whole country became a strange dystopia. Well, it went away eventually, but there's been no real commission. There's been no statement from the top by any body of the elected by the people to say just simply, this was wrong. It was wrong. It was a mistake, and it shouldn't have happened, and it shouldn't happen again. And I feel like we're going to be suffering as a nation with this deep wound until something like that happens.
So Jeffrey, I got a question. What do you say to the person that says, just like you said, this is 6 years ago. This was other administrations. This is a long time ago. We need to move on as a nation. We don't need to be fractured, broken up, divided. We don't need to be at each other's throats. We need to move on. What do you say to the person that just flippantly just says no to this?
Well, in the first place, I agree with all that. We need to move on as a nation. We don't need to be divided as a people. The way we get there is through the people signing this thing, a resolution admitting the truth that this was a calamity. And until that time comes, there's going to be this festering problem. There's anger out there, and I think everybody in this room, and certainly everybody listening, knows this. When you gather with people over the course of an evening, the subject invariably comes up, and they tell stories of deep tragedy that happened in their lives. Their families shattered, relatives dying alone, the loss of faith by the disturbance of the liturgy of life that took place in these years, the lies, the vaccine injury, which is a subject about which nobody wants to speak, but many people were injured. Many died from being forced to take an injection that they did not understand. It was an experimental injection that otherwise would have never passed FDA approval. These kinds of things are what divides the nation. That's what makes people angry. And there's a lot of anger out there. And I don't want this anger to fester. I want this to be in the past. It will not be in the past until we have a reckoning, a statement of truth. I'm not even looking for justice. I mean, that would be nice, but but if we could just get some clean statements of truth and admissions that this was not consistent with the American way of life and consistent with American law, then I think we'll be on the path to healing, but not until then.
Well, Jeffrey, I agree completely. I was a special ed teacher in New York City. I lost my job because I wouldn't get the COVID shot. I'm pretty angry about that and doing everything I can. I want to bring on Leslie Manookian, the president of Health Freedom Defense Fund here. You're signed on to this COVID justice petition as well, too. Teachers for Choice, Children's Health Defense, we've been battling alongside of you through this whole thing. Talk to us about why you support this. Give us your thoughts about covidjustice.org.
So I don't think that people, unfortunately, have as much power as we may have once had in this country. And I think that what Jeffrey's saying about this festering frustration sort of under the surface pervades American society today. People do not feel that their needs are being acknowledged or served in any way, shape, or form. And if you look at what has happened with the Epstein files, there's nothing being done about that, right? You look at what's happening with the administration right now pushing for a effective shield to protect Bayer, who owns Monsanto, which owns Roundup, from any kind of liability for its products. And you look at the pharmaceutical industry that literally made $50 billion off of COVID shots, and they've paid $35 billion in fines in the last 20, 25 years for fraud, outright fraud, misstatements, manipulation, all these things. People want some kind of a reckoning. And this is at least one potential way to make that happen, to at least be able to make their voices heard and say that we do not consent to this. We will never again consent to the overreach of COVID, and we want some kind of accountability. Now, as Jeffrey said, will that happen? I don't know, but we are sending a message to the upper echelons of power that we know that they messed with us and that we're not going to take it anymore. And I think that's what's so important about this resolution.
Yeah, and one of the things that you are very heavily involved in is the Medical Freedom Act Coalition in Idaho. You personally were responsible for the Idaho Medical Freedom Act being one of the most amazing pieces of legislation to ever pass in the country of America, almost getting rid of almost every single medical mandate that exists. And you were doing that in this great coalition. CHD is a partner with it as well, too. But headed alongside with you is Stands for Health Freedom with Leah Wilson. Let's go into Leah and talk to you about this great work of coalitions that are happening, whether it's the COVID Justice Coalition that we're putting together, the Medical Freedom Act Coalition that's happening. Talk to us about the work that Stand for Health Freedom is doing, the importance of it, and why you felt it was important to be a part of this coalition and promoting this petition.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's an honor to work with each and every one of you and to have powerful organizations coming together to represent the people in the halls of government, which is a mission that we have been devoted to at Stand for Health Freedom, to make sure that there is a large and growing voting bloc that has a voice and a say in public health policy. And COVID really brought that to light for so many, that we are stakeholders and we cannot just stand by and allow industry to be the only stakeholders when it comes to public health policy in local, state, and federal government. And so it was an easy yes for Stand for Health Freedom to be involved in COVID justice, because this is about clarity. This is about making sure that a healthy nation assesses what happened and moves forward in a way that says, we're not going to let the things that hurt families and hurt people happen again. And I think one of the things that strikes me is that our kids were used in this game of fear, that the kids were not at risk, but yet they were locked out of their schools. And when they came back into their schools, they were masked, they were separated, put in small cohorts. And we really wrote history for them through fear. And we need to make it known that we as a people see that fear is a bad governor, and we will not allow our kids to move forward thinking that it's okay that fear governed. And they need to know that we fought to right this wrong. They need to know that we want something different when they are in the positions that we were in during COVID. And so that's why we're here, that to say that fear is a bad governor. We're going to replace any elected official that wants to govern with fear, that wants to weaponize public health. And I think, I don't know about you, Michael, but one of the most profound examples of this was hospital edicts coming from the top, forcing people to die alone. And that was inhumane and absolutely unacceptable. And the COVID Justice Resolution addresses things like that. It addresses the intrusions of government from the top down, dictating what can happen in our community hospitals. And that's why we are pushing forward with the COVID Justice Resolution to make sure that things like that don't happen again.
You know, you brought up the children and our own children. And I remember being in the midst of this and thinking I was going to lose my job, and then realizing I was going to lose my job and not knowing where I was going. I remember days before I lost my job being on the phone with Leslie Manukian, because Health Freedom Defense Fund was the fiscal sponsor for Teachers for Choice, another organization that I was involved with. And she was helping with us collecting the funding for the lawsuits. And I'm like, I'm about to lose my job. And I remember telling people, I have to tell my kids I said no. I have to tell my boys that I fought. And when it comes to the children, really makes me think about the work that Autism Action Network has done, and John Gilmore, who's been fighting for this for 25 years. In a lot of ways, the autism bomb was the original COVID. There was a select group of parents that felt this earlier than the entirety of the society. And John Gilmore, his son was impacted by this some about 25 years ago or so, and he's been fighting for medical freedom in so many different areas. He's one of my mentors, someone that's taught me how to go about fighting. John, why don't you talk to us about why Autism Action Network has signed on to the COVID justice resolution?
Well, just because the need is so obvious. And, I think people like myself and a lot of people in the Autism Action Network who have vaccine-injured children who are diagnosed with autism, we started our COVID adventure kind of started years and years ago, because basically we've seen this before. What the kind of things that were done during COVID were nothing new. I think they've got to have a guidebook somewhere over there on how to deal with these situations, because the sequence and the tactics and things that they did, they've been doing for a very, very long time and getting away with it. I think what happened with COVID is it got so big and so bad that it finally brought what they've been doing for decades to the attention of basically everybody. And we got to have a reckoning. We have to have justice, with my experience with autism, even the characters are the same. You have Anthony Fauci, you had Francis Collins making the decisions. They clearly had an agenda that was determined to sort of on political and financial and institutional values, would pretty much disregard to how it actually affect real people. And they implemented all the same strategies, right? They came out with false studies. They had serious studies that they suppressed and kept inside the agencies. Those got released eventually. Any dissident voices were shut down and crushed. I mean, they went for sort of professional destruction. I mean, you just got to ask Jay Bhattacharya about that. The massive propaganda. Okay, this is not the first time they've done that. I mean, how long have we been hearing, even though obviously the number of people with autism has exploded, but we kept on hearing, well, there's no epidemic, it isn't really going up, and so on. They've got the standing policy that they simply deny what is obvious, and it was nothing new. But this time they got caught, and it has to be put out there. The United Kingdom did this. It could have their reckoning could have been a little better, but at least it was a real reckoning. There was real substance to it. So it's not as if this hasn't been done in other English-speaking democracies, and it's time for us to do it as well.
John, you, for those who don't know, you were recently granted an appointment by Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about that appointment?
Sure. Secretary Kennedy did me the honor of appointing me to the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. It's a committee that's it's advisory to the Secretary on basically what we should be doing as far as autism goes, right? And, it's been around for 25 years, which is basically as long as my injured son has been around. And my goal here with it, I think talking to a lot of the other people on here, who many of them I know, we kind of have similar stories, right? In that the 25 years or however long our children with autism have been alive, the questions we were asking 25 years ago still remain unanswered, right? When my son was first diagnosed, we officially didn't know what the cause of autism was. There was no treatments, there was no cures, there was no prevention. And at the time, we thought the autism rate was maybe somewhere between 1 in 150 or maybe even 500. Okay. 25 years later, we still officially don't claim to not know what the cause of autism is. There's no treatments, there's no cures, there's no prevention. But the latest figures are now that 1 out of 31 children in the United States have autism. So we essentially have an entire lost generation. We've lost 25 years. And hopefully now we might actually start answering those questions that I think have been assiduously avoided being answered for the last 25 years.
And you know, John, the autism epidemic and horror show is directly parallel to what's happening with COVID. It shows you what
Sure.
happens when there's no reckoning. It shows you what happens when there's no honesty, when you don't admit the sky is blue, when you don't say the emperor has no clothes. The tragedy and the crimes happen again and again and again, and it gets worse and worse. And that's why the ground was fertile for COVID to even happen, because you, the autism community, was gaslit. You were told you were crazy. You were told this was psychological disorders. As a matter of fact, autism's in the DSM-5. It's actually listed as if it is some sort of psychological disorder, when we know, those of us who pay attention, this is fully biomedical.
Sure.
This is injury. This is brain injury that's happening. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I love this Brady Bunch shot right here. This is what I want right now. We have amazing organizations: Children's Health Defense, Brownstone, Health Freedom Defense Fund, Stand for Health Freedom, Autism Action Network. I want you to know, IMA has reached out to join us. VSRF has reached out to join us. Global Wellness Forum, Feds for Freedom, Teachers for Choice, Bravest for Choice, dozens of other orgs.
Great.
We're working on getting those up on the website as well now. To go to covidjustice.org. This one's simple. Read it, sign it, and tell your friends. We have 15,000 signatures now. We need to double, triple, quadruple that. And then we go to Congress. Then we go to the Senate. And then because we got a couple friends over there, and we'll present it to some of them. And this can happen if you make it happen. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Thank you so much for doing all of the amazing, important work that all of your great organizations are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael.
covidjustice.org. Please, everybody, it's simple. Go to covidjustice.org. You don't even need a link. The link's in the show notes, but come on, covidjustice. You could type that one. You can remember that. This one's an easy one. You could tell your friends, text it to your friends, call your friends, tell your family. We get a real run on these signatures. We can move the needle. We can make this happen, and we can finally move towards a resolution in the federal government to finally have our day of reckoning and truth about COVID justice. Don't go anywhere. Now I want to turn it over to the great Dr. Merrill Nass, who did a great Substack about covidjustice.org as well, too. So check out her Substack. She's helping us to promote this as well. Thank you.
Morning, Children's Health Defense. Today, I am going to be interviewing David Rogers Webb, who I met 3 or 4 years ago in Sweden, along with Mary Holland. And he had some things to tell us that were really revolutionary. We couldn't believe what we were hearing. And both of us immediately started working on how we could help spread the word. Mary organized the production of an actual documentary about his work. David had written a book called The Great Taking, about how banks have set up a system by changing laws and regulations all over the place over a 50-year period that will allow them, if they wish to, when the circumstances are right, to actually take ownership of most of our stocks, bonds, and money. I worked with Ellen Brown to try to create a 2-page explanation of what it was he was telling us. And David started to do interviews. And so some of you may already be aware of what he has to say, but it's super important. And so I want to contextualize it along with other things that have been done at the World Economic Forum and by globalists to also try to create a world in which we will own nothing. And they say we'll be happy, but we probably won't. And we want to go back historically 100 years to talk about how this has all started, where it is going, how we can stop it, how the states and the federal government are either working to help us or hurt us, create a situation, a system where we could lose the ownership of all our property. So, David, why don't you start from the beginning, start 100 years ago, and begin to tell us how this plan was concocted and put into place? Or maybe we should tell people again what the plan is in as few words as possible, and then go back 100 years.
Okay, well, the bottom line is the dark part of this is it's not just about taking your property, it's about subjugation. It's about totalitarian control, and globally. And so I I I I think maybe we can work backwards a little bit to go back to the beginnings of this. So we have the statements of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. Everybody knows about that now, but there were precursors to this. And some of these sources I learned about in reading the notes, the references in Ed Griffin's incredible Creature from Jekyll Island, which I actually did not know about that book before I wrote The Great Taking. We've reached the same conclusions, but I knew about this stuff from my own father and from my direct primary experience of the system. The Creature from Jekyll Island is essential reading for everyone to understand what we're facing and the continuity here behind it. So one very interesting thing that Ed mentions is an article called The Wizard of Bacca Grande. You can find it out on the internet, The Wizard of Bacca Grande. And this was an interview with Maurice Strong, who, as a young man in the 1920s, somehow became the CEO of an oil company that ended up consolidating the entire Canadian oil industry into Petro-Canada. By at least the time of this article, he's friends with Henry Kissinger, with the Rockefellers. He is one of the founders of the World Economic Forum and involved with the UN in the climate agenda. So this was very early days of setting up the idea that we must save the planet. So in 1990, it's on the last page of the article, the interviewer spent a week with him on this ranch. And at the end, they're riding in a truck, and Maurice Strong is kind of, whimsical. He's just out of nowhere, he starts saying, I'm thinking about writing a novel. And in this novel, there is a threat against the whole planet. And but the only way to save the planet is if the industrialized economies will change. But they won't change. So they must be forced to change. And we have people throughout the financial system that will collapse those economies. And then he says, and what will happen to those economies? And he makes a motion like flicking a cigarette butt out of the car window as his answer as to what will happen to those economies. Now, this was in 1990. There wasn't even a global warming story at that point. So this points out the depth of the planning, but it gets even crazier.
Let me interrupt you. There was a global warming story at that point, and Maurice Strong invented it, and he brought it to the Earth Summit I think it was in Rio in 1992. And he got the Framework Convention on Climate Change adopted there in 1992.
Well, so he did that essentially 2 years after he's riding in the truck.
Right, but it took him, so he spent the first ecologic summit that he was in charge of, he was in charge of 3 of them. Well, I can't remember what they called him, the Secretary General, I think, was in Stockholm, where you live. And that was in 1972. And it took him at least 2 years to prepare for that. And they didn't get what they wanted out of that one. So he prepared much more carefully for the one 20 years later in 92. And then in 2012, he was also involved. And so, yes, I think it was around 1989 or 8. So it was 1987. He was probably the main person on Gro Harlem Brundtland's commission to develop sustainable development. And so they published that for the UN in 87, had been working on it for a few years, and came out, I think, in 89 with this idea that we had to find a common thread that would unite the nations. And we decided that, it was man's destruction of the environment and the climate that would be this unifying concept by which we could basically get the world together and create world government. So this was all part of the same thing. They were just sort of fine-tuning it between 1968, when I think David Rockefeller probably first pulled him in to start this process. And then, what we got over the years at these various UN conferences.
Yes. So, but it gets even crazier because then also from Ed Griffin's notes, I found a book published in 1953 by Bertrand Russell, who's considered to be a genius, titled The Impact of Science on Society. And I've read this, and you find some startling things in there. So the genius Bertrand Russell, he is saying, because of technological scientific society, we will have to have one world government. It's just an assertion. And he says, well, why one world government? Because then there won't be wars. We won't have wars then. But then he says that because we won't have wars, we'll have to have something else that will kill a lot of people. And he just says this outright. He says, this is in 1953, so he speculates that perhaps it will be a bacteria that will kill a lot of people, and we'll have to have that. It seems to be pointing towards some things that have happened in recent years. Then he says that if we are to do this, no nation can remain free. Why? Because any nation that remains free will outcompete the totalitarian system. Not only will it outcompete it, the people in that nation will have something to fight for, which is their freedom. So we cannot allow any part of the globe to be outside of the totalitarian system. He's writing this in 1953. So again, it's exactly what we're seeing now. Now, I should point out that Bertrand Russell had some, perhaps more than passing, involvement with the Fabians. And that takes us even further back then. So the Fabians were getting going in the latter 19th century. There were some people involved with my last name. With that, the Webbs, and no relation, no recent relation, but they clearly had some financial backing to start working on global socialism. And as some people may know, they have this famous stained glass window with them hammering the globe with sledgehammers. And the image of the wolf dressed in sheep's clothing, that they will do this by stealth.
Yes, and where is that window located, David?
Oh, it was in their headquarters in Britain.
Yeah.
I think it's since been removed, probably so no one would smash it. So now the shocking thing is the London School of Economics is Fabian. Gordon Brown, the former chancellor of the exchequer during last financial crisis, Fabian. Tony Blair, Fabian. So these people are still with us, very much in power through this entire period.
And by the way, they were involved with Jeffrey Epstein.
It's all connected. And we'll develop that more over the course of this discussion, how everything is connected.
Okay, so from way back, I think we could go back further. We could go back to technocracy, 1930, almost 100 years. We could go back further if we wished in terms of British people who thought that the white man's burden was to take over the world and run it via stealth. And that would be Cecil Rhodes and his Round Table and Milner, starting from around 1890 or so. But in any event, in modern times, there have been very wealthy people who felt that it was critically important to gain control of the entire world, and that the only way to do this was through stealth. And they could bring up young people, train them, identify the right ones, train them, and get them to carry out their agenda. And one of the ways of doing this was the Rhodes Scholars Program, the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders, and Ida Auken, who created this story that you will own nothing and be happy, was in fact the first young global leader from Denmark. So these people have been trained in multi-year they come back year after year to keep being trained as to what these organizations like the Rhodes Organization or the World Economic Forum thinks should happen, how we get there, and it's all wrapped up in a bow of kindness, getting rid of poverty, sharing things, equality for all, DEI, etc. And yet the people who are actually building out the architecture for it are people like Jeffrey Epstein, who don't care about any of that, who are psychopaths, who are using this cover of kindness and DEI to create structures that can be accepted by the people of the world and the governments of the world to get what these other folks want, which is control of resources. I'll leave that now to you.
Yeah. Well, let me extend this then. So Maurice Strong, I mentioned this to our mutual friend James Henry, and he said, "Oh, that's the guy with the crazy aunt." And I thought, what? What are you talking about?
In China.
Yeah, that's the guy with the crazy aunt. So I looked it up and he said, yeah, there's this video of Maurice Strong crying at her graveside in China. So, and forgive me, I'm forgetting her name, but I looked her up, and it turns out, oddly, she's from Ohio. She went to Oberlin College and then got big backing in the socialist movement. And so there are pictures of her with Stalin and with Mao and Zhou Enlai. How do you explain that?
Right. She was supposedly a good friend of Mao.
Yes.
These people are connected to the Rockefellers. Rockefeller, remember, had Kissinger working for him, and then Kissinger was made National Security Advisor and then Secretary of State of the whole country under Nixon, and was able to open up China. So the United States had no trade, basically tried to have nothing to do with China until the 1970s, when Kissinger secretly and David Rockefeller secretly went to China and opened things up. And Maurice Strong and his aunt were strongly connected to China. Strong actually had to escape to China when it was found he was involved with $1 million corruption scandal when he was in charge of the food for oil program in Iraq after the I forget which Iraq war, but anyway, he was given $1 million check, bribery, which he cashed, and so he got into big trouble. He was supposed to be this great humanist at the UN. Turned out he was just another crook, and so he moved to China quickly and died there. But he was central. Actually, in my book, I'm not writing a book, but in the way I see things, Maurice Strong, Henry Kissinger, and Jeffrey Epstein were three people whose careers were pushed forward by David Rockefeller and had the greatest impact over the last 50 years in destroying things for the rest of us and creating the structure for this new world order in which we would be controlled and our property stolen.
Yes.
So there you go. Those three names: Maurice Strong, Henry Kissinger, Jeffrey Epstein.
You're entitled to forget some things because there's so much in your head. I think
What have I forgotten?
You know so much. You've forgotten more than most people have ever known, I think. But so to extend this further into our present circumstance, and this is why it's valuable to probe into what's happening with the Great Taking, the architecture behind this. So the dematerialization of securities and the securities being held in these vast pools, whereby...
Tell people what securities are.
Oh, securities are stocks and bonds, all manner of financial instruments that you no longer, it used to be personal property, especially...
And you used to have a piece of paper that said you owned a certain amount of stocks.
Yes, especially when you had a certificate, there was a bright line as to that being your property. And it was clear who controlled that as collateral. You had to make a deliberate decision to use it as collateral. And there was a deliberate plan to sever that, to dematerialize, and to fuzzy that up so that everything can be used as collateral all the time by other entities, other than the owners, the quote unquote owners. So now let me just say in passing that just having an electronic system does not mean that property rights have to be severed. So, for example, the reason I came to Sweden was that they had dematerialized, they had an electronic system, but you had specific identification to every security, every bond. And I tried to prevent it from happening here. I met with the Minister for Financial Markets in Sweden, explained what was coming, but Sweden was targeted. Sweden and Finland were targeted. They could not be allowed to maintain a system where people had direct ownership of their investments. So this, again, is informed by understanding what Bertrand Russell was saying. No country can be allowed to be outside of the system.
Okay, so David, tell me, so if I own a stock and I think I own it and I get a report every month as to the value of my stock, how is it that I don't really own it necessarily?
Okay, what you have, and they really troubled themselves over this. How can we maintain an appearance of ownership when people don't own it? They really worked at that. So it is an appearance of ownership. You can make a decision to buy and sell it. And one of their big problems was, how are we going to make people think they still own it? We'll have to make sure they get the proxy statements, that they think they can vote the shares. So they call this beneficial ownership. But here's the bottom line, and you can confront your broker. Your broker probably doesn't understand this, But so I know people that have gone through this. They've had to go through 3 or 4 layers of management within their financial service firm to get anyone. This was maybe 10 years ago, I met with top securities attorneys in Sweden, and they did not understand this. So people were, it was just out there in front of them, but no one really put it
Right.
together.
So tell us
But
what this is.
the simple thing is that you cannot take your property back in the event of insolvency of the intermediary, your broker, or at some higher level in the financial system. If there is insolvency, you cannot revindicate or take back your property. That means it's not your property, plain as day. And how do we know that?
Right. So
Well,
let's explain it. That they're all, yeah, go ahead.
Well, let me say, so we know that you cannot take your property back in the event of insolvency, which means it's not your property. And we know that because
this is the bank insolvency, not your insolvency.
Yeah, not your insolvency of the other entities that were using what you thought was your property. So
right.
now,
I don't own I own my stock, but it's being held at a brokerage, right? Or a bank. It's being held at a financial corporation. And if that financial corporation goes bankrupt, they can grab my property as if it is theirs. Is that correct?
Well, the correct understanding is you don't have it. In fact, your broker does not have it. In fact, it isn't even in your state where you are. It's already legally transported elsewhere. And this is true in Europe. It's true in the United States. So let me complete the thought on how you know this. You know this because when it was implemented first in the U.S., all 50 states, beginning in 1994, with this change to the Uniform Commercial Code in all 50 states. And that way it could be done quietly. There was no attention drawn to it. But then Europe, this was then pushed by the US State Department on the rest of the world. And Europe again, this is Bertrand Russell. We have to make this uniform across the world, harmonize. So Europe was being pressured. This was beginning in maybe the early 2000s to conform. And Europe had a long history of right to property as a sacred thing. So it was a tricky thing to figure out how to subvert that in all of Europe. So they formed something called the Legal Certainty Group, which means making it legally certain that it's not your property, making it legally certain that the custodians have legal control of the property. So the Legal Certainty Group sent a detailed questionnaire to the New York Fed, which really is the Fed. The New York Fed is the Fed. The attorneys for the New York Fed responded to the Europeans in March of 2006. And so we have a detailed legal response from the highest authority possible. And this is I suspected this existed, but I didn't know how to find it. This is what another one of our mutual friends, wonderful mutual friends, Lars Johansson, found on one of his many sleepless nights. He found that by digging through, procedural stuff within the EU. That is an historically enormously important document. So it's in the great taking. I discussed this. It's so important. The entire response is included as an appendix to the book. And in that, the Fed makes it clear that they created this concept of an entitlement holder. So, which had never existed before. You're no longer a property owner, you are an entitlement holder, which works more like a contractual claim to your property, which means it is essentially to no effect in the event of insolvency of the party on the other side of the contract. So the Fed explains quite succinctly that entitlement holders, that secured creditors have priority ahead of entitlement holders to the pooled assets, and that is true even if the securities are segregated. Even if the securities are segregated. Now, this
Explain
is
what that means.
well, what sophisticated and very wealthy people like to tell themselves is that I'm special. I will be protected, and they are told by their broker or maybe even the head of the firm, you relax. Your account is segregated. This again is the subterfuge because that is just in the books and records of the first tier intermediary, your broker, the firm you're dealing with. And there much is made of the federal regulations that they must segregate the customer assets. But what does that mean? It means they are segregated in the books and records at that level from the firm's own assets. And at the higher level, they're all in the same pool. So it is something that was done to allow the people at the customer service level, essentially, to say, oh, under federal law, we have to segregate your assets. Just, you're fine. And they can say that and appear not to be lying. And they may actually believe it.
Right. And I'm sure they do
They have.
because we did actually, Mary Holland and I got on a call with a pretty high up investment manager when we told him about your book and we got a whole lot of verbiage back about how that couldn't possibly be the case and everyone was safe and blah 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 blah. And I realized then that they were incapable of actually grappling with the concepts we were providing them, that they had their story and they were sticking to it. And the other thing I want the audience to realize, again, the only way they can do this to us is through stealth. They lie, secrecy, lies, stealth. They have to pull the wool over our eyes, create all these stupid, crazy structures in order to legally make it okay to steal from us. So that is what we have to watch out for, and that is what we have to fight against, is this use of stealth, lies, and secrecy through legal channels. We have to change the way the laws are being used to harm us. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, let's see, where there are so many different directions to go in from this, but all countries have been forced to conform with this, and I think quite a lot of pressure has been brought on countries to do this. So Europe fell next. They implemented something called the Central Securities Depository Regulation in 2014, which made this the case that the property could be used without the knowledge and it's of the customer. And for example, the way they did it in Sweden was, in the first instance in the law, it says that the property cannot be used without agreement, a written agreement. But then beneath that, like nested down 3 paragraphs, is except when the property is transferred to another entity under a regulatory authority, any regulatory authority. So, and this is essentially the way it was done in the U.S. as well, is by telling people in the first instance that the entitlement holders have priority, but then nested beneath that are hidden these exceptions that assure that the property is always being used elsewhere. So it was subverted in local law in each case, but with the CIA was involved in enabling this to begin with. Then the State Department pushed this globally. This is definitely a major operation executed deliberately over decades. So now we go further. Again, this ties in with Bertrand Russell and Maurice Strong. Beyond that, and I'm bringing it up to the present time. So in December, I had suspected that maybe Indonesia was not in the net. And now we have the answer. It was not in the net, but now it is. Because Indonesia, I think, is the last place that was pressured to dematerialize their securities. So they will be pooled as well. China has a two-tiered system where they're essentially all securities that are owned by foreign interests in the Chinese securities market are pooled in this way. There is another category that is controlled essentially by the Chinese government that is not. But for anyone trying to hide or find a differentiation in the Chinese system, that's not possible. So it is conformed as well. Now we get to something that's even more mind-blowing, what has happened with Russia and Euroclear just recently. So Euroclear is the central securities depository in Europe. So when Sweden succumbed to this, all Swedish securities, including government bonds, are dematerialized and pooled in Brussels, Belgium. And the law in Brussels makes it very clear that secured creditors have priority to those assets. So now even a Swedish citizen cannot buy Swedish government bonds and have good title to those bonds. They are in Brussels, Belgium, under Belgian law. And now here's the very weird thing. Russia did the same thing. This is what has been exposed just recently, if we're paying attention. So we know that there's been a lot of signaling over decades about the encroachment on Russia, NATO's encroachment on Russia, all the tensions along the boundary there, and will we put missiles there? Won't we put missiles there? And we've assumed that the Russians have hardened their financial system, and we've been told that. But here's the very strange thing that we found just recently: the Russian central bank put a large portion of the assets of the central bank where? In Euroclear, Brussels, Belgium. And that then allowed those assets to be frozen when the conflict escalated in Ukraine. Now, you have to ask yourself, why would they do that? And it's something like 70% of the assets of the Central Bank of Russia in Euroclear, when supposedly the Russians are so smart in preparing to protect themselves. So why would they do that? Now it gets even stranger. So I want to mention another friend of mine, Parallel Mike, has a blog and has done stuff on the gray taking, and that's a good place to find excellent further discussion around this topic. Parallel Systems, Parallel Mike, but he was the first person that pointed out that the Russian assets have already been taken. Why? Because here you have a sovereign country that cannot take back its own assets. That means they've already been taken. So, and that happened 2 years ago. So now it gets stranger. Now you have all of the theater around, will we or won't we take the Russian assets, when effectively they've already been taken. because Russia can't access them.
Right. So they've been
And-
taken, but what the EU wanted to do was start to spend them in Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine. And they said, we're just going to take these assets and we're going to give them to Ukraine for rebuild.
Well-
And then the Brussels started having some second thoughts.
Okay, so let's look at that. All of our assets, all the time, are being used as collateral, many times over. And so not only is that already being done with the Russian assets, it's being done with all of our assets. So what they were talking about doing was using the Russian assets as collateral for a loan to Ukraine, which they did. And so they had all of this drama around this. Now, you had the prime minister of Belgium and the head of Euroclear multiple times saying that, please don't do this. It could collapse. It could bankrupt Belgium. It could bankrupt Euroclear, which is the hub of the entire European financial system, securities market. Now it gets even stranger. Now look at the amounts of money involved. So the total amount of the assets is 210 billion euros, which is nothing in the scheme of things. When you look at the scale of money created during COVID and just put the lie to the story that we all have to tighten our belts here, we can't come up with money for anything. But so they're saying somehow we can't come up with $210 billion without threatening the collapse of Belgium and the entire European financial system. Very strange. Then the amount they ended up using after this drama was 90 billion euros, just nothing. And Friedrich Merz, immediately after the meeting when supposedly they were not taking the assets, he said, yes, the reality is we're using the assets, which is absolutely true. You can see the way it's structured. They can talk out of both sides of their mouth. But so what I'm pointing out here is that this was all theater for a purpose, to draw attention to the vulnerability of Euroclear and the European financial system. This was not done for no reason. The placement of the Russian assets there so that they could be taken. Now you look at the nature of the Russian central bank, and what you see is that the Russian central bank is exactly like the Federal Reserve. It is something that appears to be a state institution that is actually privately controlled. It is a member of the BIS. Russia participates every step of the way in the implementation of things by the BIS, is on all the charts. And Russia dematerialized all securities just prior to what? Central Securities Depository Regulation, so that they could participate in that. And so, you know, this has big implications for the global nature of this control. It is all countries, and the power behind it is the banking power. The governments are controlled by the privately controlled banking system, not the other way around. And it is all countries that are positioned as being combatants are actually controlled by the same system. And you see this if you read Creature from Jekyll Island. This was the case in World War I. You know, when the Bolsheviks got into power overnight in March 1917, there were Brits there. I learned this from reading Solzhenitsyn's accounts, there are British officers there laughing about it. They thought it was quite funny. And
They helped, right? The Brits helped bring Lenin. So Lenin was sent on a train all across Europe to Russia. No nation stopped him.
it was going swimmingly for the Brits.
Yes.
So they thought it was quite funny. And there are pictures, Ed has pictures of there were American bankers in military uniforms riding around in vehicles in Russia at that time. So it was, the beginning of a smash and grab going on there with the bankers on all sides of it. And then you have, Ed Griffin, shows quite clearly that Warburg shows it himself. He wrote a very extensive 2-volume, memoir of how he created the Federal Reserve System. And he did. He is the architect of it, or was. And Richard Werner pointed out in his interview with Tucker Carlson recently, so Paul Warburg shows up in 1913 to pull this off right before the war, while his brother Max is running the German central banking system. So the point here, why is this important? This is not dusty history. This is what we are living in right now. And your lives and the lives of your children and their futures depend on understanding this and not living in some comic book version of what is happening here.
Right. I'm wondering whether we should repeat that in different words. What you've just said is that essentially there's a lot of false sense that we have enemies in the world, and I would agree with you, and that underneath we are in fact colluding with the Russians, the Iranians, these other nations to accomplish certain things, while the people of the world are told that these are our enemies. And then wars are actually initiated in many cases by bankers to accomplish certain strategic goals. Yeah, did I get that right?
Yes, yes. But it's not about, people like to think that it's about making money, that it's all about money. It's not. It's about power and subjugation. They can make any amount of money. It's not that they, as I've said before, they don't need your stuff. They don't need your money. They don't need your stuff. They need you not to have it. That's what this is about.
Yeah, right. Pathological thinking. And for some reason, these people are trying to carry out a plan that was initiated over 100 years ago. I don't know why they want to do that, because I don't think it'll make a nice world for their children. But this is what we find when we look under the surface. This is what we find. And it's not only your stocks and bonds that they want to take. For instance, we have this thing called natural asset corporations, and the use of conservation through the UN, through the United States government and others, which is a plan that was developed quite a while ago, called Agenda 2030, and the 30 by 30 program, which meant that 30% of all the world's land and water, including oceans, would be placed under conservation management. So even if you own property, your government might designate 30% of your country as requiring conservation, because there are endangered species that only live on your property or your region, or because the land is being the natural resources are being lost, the soil is degraded, it's washing into the ocean. So therefore, the federal government has to come in and put your land under conservation easements that will restrict how you can use your own property. So this is the plan of 30 by 30. And the natural asset corporations is a way to monetize this, so that NGOs can come in, such as the Nature Conservancy and the World Wildlife Fund, which were founded by globalists, including Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was a card-carrying Nazi, under the guise of conservation and saving the planet. They want to take control of your physical assets as well. There's also a plan 50 by 50, which means that by 2050, 50% of the land and water of the world will be placed under conservation, and your what you think you may think you have clear title to your property, you own you can do whatever you want with it. Well, you won't be able to. This was already initiated by under President Biden in the US, was initiated in Europe, and people are finding, oh, the government gave me money to do these great conservation things on my farm. Wonderful. You think you got a few $1,000s, and now you're doing these great things to, stop erosion on your property. Well, what you didn't know, you didn't read the fine print. It means the Nature Conservancy or the federal government are going to be able to tell you how you are now to initiate certain conservation programs on your property. And for instance, you were growing pigs, you can't grow pigs anymore because the pigs are not doing what we wanted you to do. So your pigs are gone. Now, what that means is the value of your property is less. It's still your property, but you can't use it the way you want to.
Yeah.
So this is how they begin to move in and make you own nothing. The plan is to make us renters, those of us who are left, just like you have to rent my Microsoft Word. I have to rent space, on Google. If I have to pay monthly for this, that, and the other, at Amazon, for example. And the plan is to make me rent everything in the future. If it's not me, it'll be my children or my grandchildren. So this is not a plan just to take stocks and bonds. Most people don't own stocks and bonds, but most Americans, over 60%, own a home, or at least they're paying off a home. They own a car, or they're paying off a car, and they want you to have to rent those as well. David.
Yeah, well, it's really about eliminating any personal agency or economic independency of even entities, any group of people that would have agency together. No private businesses of any size. It is the Fabian creeping stealth strategy that you're describing very well, Meryl. But there are things happening right now. So let's say during the COVID period, smaller size businesses suffered terribly, and many were forced out of business. But the big entities absolutely thrived and grew to take over much more economic activity. Now look at what has been the effect of all the uncertainty created by the Trump tariffs. One day it's 100% tariff. Now we're going to make it 130% tariff. Now maybe it'll go down to 30 now, but no, it's back up from one day to the next. And I think many of us are old enough to remember that the world didn't used to be like this. Having the president of the United States making statements, tweeting statements like this. What I'm saying is this is quite deliberate. This bull in a china shop just spouting nonsense from one day to the next. What does that do? If you look, what he said is we're making a deal for this company that we like, or this group of people, or come to us, another country, if they want to make a deal, we will make a deal with them. This is top-down totalitarian control. This is central planning globally.
Yeah, let me interrupt. So tariffs are supposed to be the responsibility of Congress, and yet the president has usurped that authority.
He's usurped it, and whether he has or not, what he's done is created a degree of uncertainty for business people that has destroyed their ability to plan and do anything. So what is very real, whether any of this was real or not, it has been highly, highly damaging to the global economy and but especially to uh, people or businesses that were selected as the winners, these survivors. That's what we're seeing here.
Winners and losers.
It's a top-down, we're going into top-down central planning globally where the great unwashed people that are not part of the system, they're just not allowed to survive. We're going to make it very difficult for you to know what is happening from one day to the next.
Yes.
And then you extend that. So what happened in the Caribbean when they did or they didn't, fire on boats in international waters and then kill the survivors at sea? And what does that say about maritime law? These are ancient things that are being torn down, and pirating oil tankers, whether it's even happening or not, or going in and kidnapping a head of state, whether that was real or not, or the assassination or not, fake assassination attempts on people. What I'm suggesting is, even if all of that stuff isn't even real, it is destroying stability. It's destroying stability. It is confidence for anyone other than those in the know on the inside. So what they are doing is fomenting global instability. If you pay attention to it, I'm sure everybody is overwhelmed right now by what is happening every day, day after day. So this is not the behavior of people that just want a financial system that they are benefiting from. They are destroying the financial system right now. It's a debate, including with friends of mine. Well, why wouldn't they just want to keep milking the system that they completely control? That's the rational thing to do. And that's, I've understood the degree of this control for more than 25 years. And I just accepted that, well, yes, there are people that have this power. They're in that position, but they're mortal. They can only have so many homes and boats and cars. And as long as the system is kind of working for humanity, it's not perfect, but okay. But if you look at what they're doing now, they are not just milking the position that they've had. They are going into another phase here, which is the destruction of the system.
I think that's true. I think certainly, again, when you look at the Jeffrey Epstein files, Jeffrey Epstein was funding people to develop the architecture for a whole new financial system. And what you see at the UN is the UN said the current financial system is no longer fit for purpose. We don't get the DEI. We have to build back better, destroy what we have so we can build back better. And so this has been a plan, again, to enrich certain people even more and take away more. It's a crazy plan. I don't know if it's the same plan that Jeffrey Epstein was working on or not, but I do know that the Sustainable Development Goals was an excuse for what Epstein was funding. So so basically the story was the same, both for the Epstein people, JP Morgan Bank, Bill Gates group, and for the UN people. Now, whether that comes to fruition or not is something else. Let's talk, we're already over time, but we need to talk about the Clarity Act, and we need to talk about what's going on at the level of the states and the fact that some states are trying to build out gold banks to try to develop a stable financial economy, at least in their state. So tell us what you know quickly about all this, please.
Okay. Well, I don't know about the gold banks. I've heard a little bit about it, but that's not really my thing. What we've been working on for the last 2 years is legislation at the state level to strike these exceptions from the Uniform Commercial Code that allow the property to be used by secured creditors of the intermediaries. And so we have found, when I first exposed this, lots of people thought, well, I don't know if this is true, but what we found once legislation started being brought and we encountered the banking lobby through this process, it got real very fast. So we know through this process that this is absolutely real. They cannot refute this, that they tried, but all of their arguments are lies, flat out
so
lies.
let me back up. You're talking about going to state legislatures and trying to have them change the law to get rid of the Uniform Commercial Code exceptions that allow these higher entities to take control of our property, our stocks and bonds.
Yes. Again, James Patrick did this film, Stop It. So you can see some of the reels of the actions in the state legislatures. And I'd say I did not do this. I've engaged and participated in it, but the beauty of it is that people there almost immediately in the States read the book, learned about this and developed this approach. This is Don Grandy, who's the attorney who developed this very elegant solution to just striking the exceptions. Don Grandy at truenorthpublicpolicy.com. So if people want to engage, they can do that through Don, TRU, no E. But it is a battle. We've learned a lot through that. This year, there are bills coming in Tennessee again under Bud Halsey, House Bill 2611. Cody Maynard in Oklahoma, House Bill 3549. Jason Kyle in Utah, House Bill 0543. And now possibly in Montana and Idaho. So people, now let me say the hard part about this. I know we're taking a lot of time, and maybe there isn't time to do this, but what we've learned is we have been able to prevail in committee against the muscle that shows up to argue against us. So
the banking lobby people.
The banking lobby. So for example, Don and I were in South Dakota. They sent 8 banking lobbyists. And they all stand up and say the same thing. You don't need to do this. You have your property. It's yours. It can't be taken. We have to have this to have a modern security system. And they always have ringers on the committee that are on the side of the banking lobby. So one of these guys said, we have all these people from our state saying, don't do this. Who are these guys here for the bill? They aren't even from our state. So Don had driven from North Dakota to South Dakota. He is a damn foreigner for having done that. I had come from Sweden, and when I had a chance to speak, they asked me, who do you represent? And I said, I represent myself. I'm here because I care about what's going to happen to people. And they cannot wrap their brains around that. Someone who's not being paid to do what they're doing versus these paid lobbyists. So we managed to prevail. The committee, we had to be there to argue it. But then it goes to the House floor, and then it's easily killed on the House floor. So we've been through this a number of times. So they have their people on the floor that are going to speak. There's no opportunity to rebut them. The banking lobby fans out and goes to every member, sometimes multiple times, before the committee hearing, before the hearing on the floor, and they basically threaten them. They frighten them. In Tennessee, they threaten the treasurer of the state with withdrawal of financial services from the state.
Who
So this is
threatened?
what we're
Who
facing.
threatened? The Fed?
The banking lobbyists.
So what does that
Um,
mean? They would take away financial services from the state?
I think it's an empty threat. They are just saying we just won't do business with anyone in the state if you make this change.
Yes.
So it is a bully tactic, and the
Okay,
only
so
way, yeah.
so the powers that be who've created this system and who are fighting to preserve it have made it extremely complicated. So hardly any constituents understand it. But that means it's our job to simplify it, spread the
It's
word, have them calling their representatives and embarrassing them. So if you vote, in favor of the bank lobbyists, you're voting against your constituents and we won't reelect you. That's
Well,
that's the
I have
tactic that
to
must be taken.
let me say it's more than that, because what we found, people have been trained into this kind of team support behavior where they think it's about cheering and supporting your side and holding placards that say something or making phone calls. That is busy work. Doesn't do a damn thing. What it requires is even one person that understands the importance of it, and it actually is not complicated. These are very simple ideas here, and that person would have to care enough to go to all the legislators before the vote, to care enough to do the work in their state, which I did in Tennessee. I mean, I went up and down the hallways and met with all the legislators, and that's how we actually nearly got it through in Tennessee before they came down on us. But this is the shocking thing, and it's a big thing. No one shows up really. People know about this. There is a very bizarre kind of detachment on the part of people psychologically, where they think, as I say, it's like a narcotic, especially if people are stressed, that they must place the responsibility on someone else, like Trump will do it. I don't have to do anything because Trump has been elected or whatever.
Well, some people
Uh,
are like that, but having fought the WHO and I believe we won, I don't believe that. I think we can get enough people either donating, we can get enough people involved. It was said by a number of folks that when a Congress member went to a local rally and spoke, the number one question they were asked was, "What are you doing about the WHO?" And it got to the point where they really had to, come along with us and
well,
say, we're not going to let the WHO into our state to give us our public health orders. So
I agree. You have shown it can be done, and it can be done. But the problem is that people, let me there's this analogy I use, that of the castle, to explain this to people in the financial services business, the importance of this to them. The medieval fortress towns, the castle was put on the hill, and then they build a big wall around the area. Now, what was the purpose of the wall? It was so that people would settle inside the town wall. Now, those people thought that they were being protected by the Lord on the hill, when it's known the real purpose of that was so that a marauding army would have to go through the townspeople to get to the keep on the hill. That is the financial services industry. All of the securities are are not down in the town with the townspeople. They're transferred up to J.P. Morgan, which is in the castle up on the hill.
this is
The
David Rockefeller's bank, by the way.
Yes, yes.
JP Morgan Chase. David
Well, J.P.
Rockefeller was the
Morgan, I
chairman of
say,
Chase Bank.
they're not literally at J.P. Morgan, but J.P. Morgan has been behind the architecture of this whole thing going back decades. So the point is, the people in the financial services industry conflate themselves with the Lord on the hill, thinking that their interests are aligned and they will be protected by the big players in this, when in reality, they are the simple townsfolk that are fodder when this thing collapses, because they have responsibility to their clients. They have the legal responsibility of their clients, but they do not have their clients' property. It isn't even in the state where they are. So, and it's designed this way. Their businesses will be destroyed, their lives will be destroyed, they will have no recourse. Um, so we need people that will face up to that in the financial services industry in their states, that will become engaged. That's what has not happened.
Yes. Is there anything we're missing that we haven't covered, David?
So what I want to draw together here to gather up the loose ends here
Thanks.
is the control by the banking power behind the global level, the Russian central bank, the Chinese central bank, the Indonesian system, the U.S., Europe. It is total, and that control extends down to the state level in the United States. It is pervasive, top to bottom control by the banking interests. That's very important to understand. Now, what I have to say is if you are feeling threatened, and pick whatever the things are that are threatening you. If you're concerned about, things developed by DARPA, or chemtrails, or any of the myriad threats against you, they are all being funded. They all seem to have unlimited funding.
Right.
Where is that funding coming from? It's coming from the banking power that controls everything. Your enemy is not the Russian people. It's not the Chinese people. It's not the Arabs. It is the people that are in control of your own country and society where you are.
Good point. And the people who are above them, who we haven't been able to identify yet, but they seem to be bankers.
It's clearly there. That is where they are placed, and we don't know who they are, and we never will know who they are. So we can't trouble ourselves too much about that. The people that you were shown, that's the other thing I'd say. This is all clearly being way, way hyped up for a reason. It's very distasteful, very frightening, overwhelming. This is how manufactured consent works. And figures like Epstein and Trump, they are designed villain characters. Now, they may be villains, they may be very bad people, but they are essentially face people. They are not actually doing anything. They are creatures of this.
No, they're not making the decisions. They're carrying out their roles.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Anything
All right.
else?
Anyway, I want to say thank you, Meryl, so much and again, coming back, that was a really pivotal thing, coming to that conference at Johannesburg Schlott and meeting you and Mary. And I'm very grateful to both of you. And the documentary, it would not have happened without your encouraging me to do that. The people you involved were just such a gift, extraordinary. And actually, I did the take that was used for it in this room. I did that in one take, one continuous shot. They were able to work with that. It's just a very powerful piece.
We're talking about his book, The Great Taking, and the documentary that Children's Health Defense sponsored. Yeah, I talked to the filmmakers and I was shocked at how quickly they were able to put that together in almost no time. They interviewed you and they, because everybody realized how important it was. And let me point out that your book, David, that explains the financial architecture and how this coup d'etat was undertaken and succeeded has been translated into at least 9 languages. Everybody needs to become aware of this, the information that David has provided, which is critical if you want to help us fight so that you can retain your own property and pass it on to your children.
The PDF of the book is free. That's another way this went viral globally. So you can go to thegreattaking.com. There's a free download of the PDF. There are print books you can get through Lulu if you want to have a hard copy.
Yeah, thank you.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.